pursuit of an idealistic lifestyle and freedom, a couple from Chicago bought a secluded property. They wanted to become closer to nature and be free from prying eyes into their hedonistic lifestyle. The local legend has it that the land is haunted by the devil and the souls of the murdered owners. Some people claim to have heard screams or the barking of phantom dogs, even sometimes shadowy figures roaming and standing guard over the property. But why would the land be haunted by the devil, you may ask? Well, the thing is that the main subject of today's story, Charles Scudder, was an openly gay member of the Church of Satan, and the property he chose to purchase was located in a small, sleepy town in northwest Georgia. Following the murders, some people believed that it was a satanic-related crime, but was it a crazy LSD-fueled kind of black magic ritual, or just a robbery justified by prejudice? Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for joining today. And a couple of you, by the way, have sent me emails asking me to cover what happened to Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, who, if you have not heard, he got his head whooped with a hammer. Someone broke in and hit him with a hammer. He's not dead, so that's why I was like, in response, I don't know why you want me to cover this because the guy's not dead. He's alive. And the name of this podcast is called 10-Minute Murder. So that's kind of what I replied with both times. And they replied, they may have been teaming up on me, I'll be honest with you. But they replied with something along the lines of, it's 10-Minute Murder, but sometimes you do episodes that aren't 10 minutes. So why not do an episode that's not exactly a murder? And never before in my life have I been bodied this hard by an email. So I've got no response. However, I will tell you this, there's not a lot of information. It only happened 2 or 3 weeks ago from the time of me recording this, so there's not a lot to talk about. The guy's in jail, Paul Pelosi's alive, and that's basically all we know right now. So, episode over, I guess. So now we can get on with today's episode. Before we get going with it, this is your reminder to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts, probably where you're hearing this now, and connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links are in the show notes of this episode, as well as at 10minutemurder.com. Now to the story. Charles Scudder was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on October 6, 1926. His family and neighbors were all highly educated and had a high income. Later on, now Dr. Charles Scudder moved to Chicago in the late 1950s with an impressive resume. Contrary to popular belief, Charles was not a medical doctor, but he had a PhD in pharmacology. Charles was cultured, intelligent, soft-spoken, with impeccable manners. He probably lifted his pinky when drinking a cup of tea. At least that's how I'm picturing it. The final job post of Dr. Charles Scudder was as a professor of pharmacology at Loyola University in Chicago and assistant director of the Institute for the Study of Mind, Drugs, and Behavior. And if that last part is making you think of LSD, you're on the right track. Charles, who was not fond of his neighborhood, said that he wanted to get away from, quote, taxes, light bills, gas bills, water bills, heating bills, and the helpless feeling that resulted from watching my old neighborhood disintegrate into an urban ghetto. In the search for a simpler life, he wanted to build a home without amenities like electricity, a phone, or television. Joey Odom was born on March 27, 1938, in Cook County, Illinois. He was far less privileged than Charles, as he only had a second-grade education. Charles was disappointed by the rat race and the fake behavior he encountered on a daily basis. He wanted to cut himself off from the privileged life of a wealthy academic and find his own place on earth, which he could turn into his own form of paradise. Along with his life partner, officially known as his housekeeper, Joey Odom, in 1976, they left Chicago after finding the perfect spot. 40 acres of property in Georgia, in a forest surrounded by mountains, with pleasantly mild weather and clean air. He resigned from his department position on his 50th birthday, sold his house along with most of his belongings, and left Chicago for good. Tryon, in northwest Georgia in the late 1970s and early 1980s, was economically depressed. Young people had nothing better to do than to drive around in their worn-out cars. And that's how many passed the time, just joyriding. Their small southern town was basically safe from major crimes and outright evil, which did prowl bigger cities like Atlanta. But it was full of small-town prejudices. No wonder why a gay Yankee couple would not be welcomed into the sleepy town. And the two men began building their own castle, by hand, in the middle of the forest in Chattanooga County. Surrounded by dead trees, which resembled what Charles imagined a tree corpse would look like, he coined the name of the residence, the Corpsewood Manor. The extraordinary home was decorated with various quirky accessories, like a pink gargoyle fountain, a couple of human skulls, occult books and tools, and a window depicting Baphomet. They also got two 150-pound English mastiffs, named Beelzebub and Arsoneth, to protect their estate. The former is a demon's name, and the latter is an H.P. Lovecraft character. Besides the castle, they also laid bricks for a 3-story so-called chicken coop. The chicken house consisted of a first floor, which was for poultry and food storage, the second for canned goods and the couple's porn collection, and the third for their pink room, also known as their pleasure chamber. The pair engaged in their favorite free time activities, which mostly consisted of things like playing on a harp, reading books, or sipping a cup of tea in the fresh air. Even though the locals rumored the manor to be a place of satanic rituals, the worst the homeowners would do was throw sex parties for their out-of-town friends. And despite quitting his job earlier, Charles allegedly continued his own research with the drugs. When he left his Chicago job, he gave himself a farewell gift. He stole 12,000 doses of LSD and brought them with him. Joey Odom, who had been sort of a housekeeper, cooked meals in a wood stove using ingredients that they grew and harvested themselves. Scudder even made his own wine using grapes from their vineyard. Unfortunately, their sexual orientation and religious beliefs proved to be an obstacle in rural Georgia in the 1970s. So, of course, the sheriff tried unsuccessfully to bring charges against the couple for their odd behavior. But being a member of the Church of Satan falls into the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And it's worth mentioning that members of the Church of Satan do not worship the devil nor believe that a Christian notion of Satan literally exists. As atheists, the members perceive the devil as a symbol of defiance against Abrahamic religions, which they associate with the suppression of humanity's natural instincts. They believe in personal liberty and individualism. Their 11 satanic rituals include, for example, do not harm children, and do not kill animals unless you are attacked or for your food. And most probably it was only Charles who was a dedicated Satanist, as Joey remained Catholic. Joey would even let locals hunt on their land or let them sample his delicious home-cooked food along with Scudder's wine. Nevertheless, it did not prevent the locals to chatter about, quote, the homosexual devil worshippers. Charles invited guests for sex parties hosted in the Pink Room, which supposedly looked like a dungeon filled with chains, whips, candles, and of course, mattresses. Despite what the locals wanted to believe, these spicy activities were consensual and probably, on rare occasions, involved local men. Tony West was a 30-year-old unemployed construction worker. His roommate was Avery Brock, a 17-year-old part-time truck driver. It was Avery who told Tony about, quote, the queer devil worshippers. Charles and Joey's existence seemed effortless to Avery, and he convinced the unemployed roommate that robbing them would make them wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. According to Amy Petulia, the author of the Corpsewood Manor murders in North Georgia, Avery Brock had some sexual encounters with Charles. Others claim that Avery simply hunted in the Corpsewood Manor's land or briefly got to know Charles and visited the property sparingly. Regardless of the purpose of his visit, during his visits, the impressive bricked residence made Avery believe that the owners were wealthy. He didn't yet realize that the property looked so because it absorbed most of Scudder's life savings, owing to food, self-sufficiency, lack of electricity bills to pay, and an organic vegetable garden. Joey and Charles managed to live off just over $200 a month from a small inheritance of Scudder's. On December 12, 1982, Tony West and Avery Brock arrived unannounced and unexpected at the manor, along with two friends, teenagers Joey Wells and Teresa Hudgens. Note there are now two Joeys in this story. Joey and Teresa, the teens, were about to have a driving around the town date, but their car broke down, so they joined Tony and Avery for the night. Charles, hospitable as always, welcomed the unannounced visitors with his homemade wine and invited them to the Pink Room on the 3rd floor of the chicken coop. BTW, you can find the pictures of all this stuff I'm talking about on the 10 Minute Murder Facebook and Instagram pages. Some sources say that the 4 guests were huffing paint thinner or glue together. They weren't taking Charles's LSD. At one point, Avery Brock went downstairs to get more of this stuff from the car. He returned with a gun and aimed it at Charles. And Charles, maybe trying to calm the situation, which was super tense at this moment, said, "Bang, bang," jokingly. Wells and Hudgens tried to make use of this awkward moment to make a run for it, but the car engine refused to start. Avery told them to come back, and as they walked into the Pink Room, trembling, they found Avery holding a knife to Charles's neck and demanding to know where all of their money was kept. But of course, there wasn't any. Avery bound Charles with a piece of fabric and took him out of the chicken coop into the main house, where he had previously already shot Joey Odom and killed their 2 dogs as well. When Charles saw the lifeless bodies of his dogs and partner, he was immediately filled with grief and despair. He seemed immediately heartbroken and took responsibility for letting his partner's killer inside and spoke what would be his final words. "I asked for this." Avery shot him. Following the murders, Avery and Tony raided the house in search of valuables and cash. As what Charles told them turned out to be true, there were no treasures to rob. They were so desperate that they even tried to steal the big harp, but it wouldn't fit in the car. They eventually stole the couple's Jeep and fled the state. 3 days later, they stole another car in Mississippi and killed that owner, Navy Lieutenant Kirby Key Phelps. On December 16th, it was discovered by a neighbor that the Corpsewood Manor's owners were dead, and he notified the sheriff. That same day, Teresa Hudgens informed the police about what happened and stated that she would have reported it earlier, but she was held hostage by Joey Wells, who covered up for his friends. Neither were charged as they fully cooperated with authorities. While Avery and Tony were at large, they argued about the next move and decided to split up in Texas. Avery turned himself in on December 20th in Georgia, and Tony was arrested in Tennessee on Christmas Eve. Both of them defended their attack, saying that the homosexual devil worshippers deserved it. Avery, facing all of the evidence, pleaded guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences. Tony also received 3 consecutive life sentences. Both have been denied parole multiple times. Nowadays, 90% of the ill-fated Manor structure is gone due to time and vandals. However, you can still encounter a ruin overgrown by trees and bushes. It's a brick mansion in the Chattahoochee National Forest.